This lesson is about the principles and ideas of recovery within the behavioral health field. We're going to explore these principles and also take a look at how these ideas affect the persons that we serve and the individuals who provide these services. Recovery has been identified as a primary goal for behavioral health care. In August of 2010, leaders in the behavioral health field, consisting of people in recovery from mental health and substance use problems, and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, met to explore the development of a common, unified working definition of recovery. Prior to this, SAMHSA had separate definitions for recovery from mental disorders and substance use disorders. These different definitions, along with other government agency definitions, complicate the discussion as we work to expand health insurance coverage for treatment and recovery support services. Building on these efforts, and in consultation with many stakeholders, SAMHSA has developed a working definition and set of recovery principles. A standard unified working definition will help advance recovery opportunities for all Americans and help to clarify these concepts for peers, families, funders, providers, and others. The working definition of recovery from mental disorders and/or substance use disorders developed by SAMHSA is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Through the Recovery Support Strategic Initiative, SAMHSA has identified 4 major dimensions that support a life in recovery. The first dimension is health, overcoming or managing one's disease or symptoms. For example, abstaining from the use of alcohol, illicit drugs, and non-prescribed medication if one has an addiction problem, and for everyone in recovery, making informed, healthy choices that support physical and emotional well-being. Number 2 is home. Everyone needs a stable and safe place to live. Number 3, purpose. Everyone needs meaningful daily activities, such as a job, school, volunteering, family caretaking, or creative endeavors, and the independence, income, and resources to participate in society. And finally, number 4, community. Everyone needs relationships and social networks that provide support, friendship, love, and hope. While the SAMHSA definition is powerful, perhaps more powerful is the definition of recovery that comes from individuals who have themselves recovered from significant mental illness or a significant substance use disorder. While there are many voices in the field and there is not a unified definition by this group of individuals who have lived experience, there is a definition that we'll call the peer definition of recovery that is generally accepted. And that is, recovery is a deeply personal, unique process of changing one's attitudes, values, feelings, goals, skills, and roles. It is a way of living a satisfying, hopeful, and contributing life, even with the limitations caused by illness. Recovery involves the development of new meaning and purpose in one's life as one grows beyond the catastrophic effects of the illness. There are a number of guiding principles within the recovery movement. First, there are many pathways to recovery. Individuals are unique with special needs, strengths, goals, health attitudes, behaviors, and expectations for recovery. Pathways to recovery are highly personal and generally involve a redefinition of identity in the face of crisis or a process of progressive change. Furthermore, pathways are often social, grounded in cultural beliefs or traditions, and involve informal community resources which provide support for recovery. The pathway to recovery may include one or more episodes of psychosocial or medical treatment. For some, recovery involves neither treatment nor involvement with mutual aid groups. Recovery is a process of change that permits an individual to make healthy choices and improve the quality of his or her life. Number 2, recovery is self-directed and empowering. While the pathway to recovery may involve one or more periods of time when activities are directed or guided to a substantial degree by others, recovery is fundamentally a self-directed process. The person in recovery is the agent of recovery and has the authority to exercise choices and make decisions based on his or her recovery goals that have an impact on the process. The process of recovery leads individuals toward the highest level of autonomy of which they are capable. Through self-empowerment, individuals become optimistic about life goals. Number 3, recovery involves a personal recognition of the need for change and transformation. Individuals must accept that a problem exists and be willing to take steps to address it. These steps usually involve seeking help for their disorder. The process of change can involve physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual aspects of the person's life. Number 4, recovery is holistic. Recovery is a process through which one gradually achieves greater balance of mind, body, and spirit in relation to other aspects of one's life, including family, work, and community. Number 5, recovery has cultural dimensions. Each person's recovery process is unique and impacted by cultural beliefs and traditions. A person's cultural experience often shapes the recovery path that is right for him or her. And number 6, recovery exists on a continuum of improved health and wellness. Recovery is not a linear process. It is based on continual growth and improved functioning. It may involve relapse and other setbacks, which are a natural part of the continuum, but not inevitable outcomes. Wellness is the result of improved care and balance of mind, body, and spirit. It is a product of the recovery process. Number 7, recovery emerges from hope and gratitude. Individuals in or seeking recovery often gain hope from those who share their search for or experience of recovery. They see that people can and do overcome the obstacles that confront them, and they cultivate gratitude for the opportunities that each day of recovery offers. Number 8, recovery involves a process of healing and self-redefinition. Recovery is a holistic healing process in which one develops a positive and meaningful sense of identity. Number 9, recovery involves addressing discrimination and transcending shame and stigma. Recovery is a process by which people confront and strive to overcome the stigma. Number 10, recovery is supported by peers and allies. A common denominator in the recovery process is the presence and involvement of people who contribute hope and support and suggest strategies and resources for change. Peers, as well as family members and other allies, form vital support networks for people in recovery. Providing service to others and experiencing mutual healing help create a community of support among those in recovery. Number 11, recovery involves joining or rejoining and building or rebuilding a life in the community. Recovery involves a process of building or rebuilding what a person has lost or never had due to his or her condition and its consequences. Recovery involves creating a life within the limitations imposed by the condition. Recovery is building or rebuilding healthy family, social, and personal relationships. Those in recovery often achieve improvements in the quality of their life, such as obtaining education, employment, and housing. They also increasingly become involved in constructive roles in the community through helping others, productive acts, and other contributions. And finally, number 12, recovery is a reality. It can, it will, and it does happen. Persons with lived experience were the source of the initial momentum in what we now call the recovery movement. These individuals who had experienced recovery have tried to share their message of hope with all who are affected by behavioral health needs. They speak passionately about their experiences, sometimes expressing significant anger at how the behavioral health treatment system had failed them. An excellent resource regarding the consumer-driven recovery movement is the National Empowerment Center. On their website, we can find an excellent variety of articles and videos regarding recovery. One of the most powerful sections of the website is where individuals tell their own stories of recovery. A powerful international voice in their consumer-led recovery movement is Dr. Daniel Fisher. I'll let him tell his story, and also allow him to give you an understanding of what it's like to be a person in recovery.
I was a member of our White House Commission for Mental Health, and over the course of a year, there was a lot of struggle, and that was over 10 years ago, as to what direction we should take. And we did manage to at least establish a vision for that report and for that set of recommendations. And the vision was that we see a future where everyone diagnosed with a mental illness will recover a full life in the community. And it's very important, I think, to have a theme. And the theme that you all have in this conference, I think, is especially important to recovery, and that's hope. And it's also important for suicide prevention. In fact, the biggest indicator of people taking their life is a loss of hope. And I'm afraid that in this country, but I'm afraid it happens here, I know it happens in our country, that unwittingly, I hope, our mental health system more often robs people of hope than gives people hope. And this is a tragedy of proportions that cannot be measured. And I want to talk a little about my own recovery experience. And I think it's important. I see there are others that will be speaking about their recovery, but that's a track that is not necessarily available to everyone. So I'm going to say right at the outset that recovery happens. Recovery is real. And I think it's hard for people to recognize that reality. Give me some water here. I feel it happen. I generally am not that thrilled with being behind a podium, so I'll step out a little bit here. I grew up in a family in the East Coast of the United States, a professional family. My father was a doctor, and we classified, we were in a cultural group called WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and very heavy in the British tradition. I went to a school, elementary school, really from 1st through 12th grade, which was based on the English prep school model or public school model, which was very rigid. It was good for discipline, but it was short on sort of expression. Personal expression was no premium on that. And I achieved what I was supposed to achieve in that school, but at the expense of some of my humanity. To make matters even worse, in a way, the school was founded by my great-grandfather. So the dining room that I ate in was the Fisher dining room. The main prize for the school was the Fisher Prize. I mean, history weighed heavily on my shoulders. And you can see it in this first slide, which is, come on. I knew technology would let us down a little bit. AV, where are you? There we are. Okay, that's what I had to do. Shout. You see here my family pictured in 1953. So, yes, you can guess I was born during the war, that is the Second World War. So you see in the back row these rather tall members of the family. My father is the middle, and next to him my mother. And the tallest of them all there was my mother's younger brother, and he actually was a very good friend with President Kennedy. Roomed with him in undergraduate and prep school. And to the right there was my mother's older brother. He was the perfect one, did everything right. Doctor, Rhodes Scholar, hard to duplicate. And his children are here on the right, trying to live up to him. And there I am, very much stiff and at attention. I'm going to follow whatever instructions I'm given. And so that left me, and then my, very significantly here, this is my older sister and my older brother. It's not fair to only show it on one side. There we are, over there. And my older sister actually married a doctor, that was good. She was supposed to do that. And but my my older brother, he kind of deviated. He went off to Colombia, South America, and raised cattle. Imagine that. It was a very healthy choice, I think. My younger sister had a great deal of difficulty. She was a lovely child, very creative, very bright, but she suffered very severe anorexia when she was 8 years old. And my family, because they were doctors, said it must be a chemical imbalance. So I was launched in the 60s to solve my sister's problems and also my father's problems. My father developed Huntington's disease, which is a hereditary disease, and I've had a 50-50 chance of getting. So I had two reasons to go into the laboratory and become a biochemist. One was to solve my father's Huntington's, the other was to solve my sister's anorexia, which it turned out my sister's anorexia was due to abuse, sexual abuse that she suffered. And anorexia very often is due to trauma. And so I went off and tried to do this. However, it was by the late 60s, I had my PhD in my hand, and the entire world was upside down at that point. And somehow going to the laboratory, which I dutifully was doing, I got my PhD, and I was 24. I was really going as fast as I could to get the Nobel Prize and solve all these problems. And what I found myself instead doing was trying to advance the slide. Why are these not? There we go. That's me in 1969. Whoa, wait a minute, what happened? So, yeah, you can see I have a bandana, long hair, beard. I was pretty good at fitting in with whatever was going on. And I was living in Washington, D.C., and that's what was going on. So I assumed the garb and the position, the hair, and everything. So I was doing this sort of modern dance during the day, during the weekends and nighttime in the parks. And on weekdays, I was still going to the laboratory and trying to the work that I was doing, ironically, was to try to determine what was controlling the biosynthesis of dopamine and serotonin. So it was like over here, one life, and then over here, another life. And they were so different. It was hard to believe it was the same person. I was the same person. And so, in fact, I couldn't really maintain the separation indefinitely, and luckily I couldn't. But in trying to bring them together, I actually stopped altogether going to work. Just prior to that, I'll show you a drawing. I've tried to get my daughter, my younger daughter, lives in LA and is an artist, and I've asked her to draw some of these pictures because pictures often are easier to decipher than words, because I'm trying to work on a book on it. And she said she couldn't do it, she wouldn't do it. She said I had to do it. I had to do the drawings because I knew what I wanted to draw. So bear with me, these are imperfect. This is a drawing that I just completed, trying to explain what happened in my transition from, so you see over on the left, Dartmouth College. That's a very, revered Ivy League college. And it was the 4th annual Leukocyte Culture Conference. I was presenting my PhD results there. And you can see me in a green suit. And I'm giving a lecture to, several hundred people. And it's all about the growth of cells. That's what I was working on. Stepwise mechanism of cell growth. There I am, and that was 1969. It was September 1969. You can see over there the date. And as I walked down from the podium, this hippie graduate student walks up to me and he says, "Hey man, were you stoned? That was a great talk. Were you stoned? Let's try this purple pill." Well, it was mescaline, and I don't know any of you that have tried or would admit that you've tried mescaline or any of the hallucinogens. But when I look back on, I needed something like that. Because I was really rigid. The next thing I knew, I did try it. I took this pill, and you see me up there hugging a tree. And I don't know if people know the Salvador Dali persistence of time painting. That's what those clocks are supposed to be. The time lasts forever. And as opposed to the feeling I had before, which was I never had enough time, I had to hurry, I had to do this. No, there's plenty of time. The other, it looks as though I took my clothes off completely. I didn't actually, but I did take off that suit, which never was wearable again. That green suit was somewhere. I guess I could draw it somewhere there. But I'm standing on a stone in the middle of this stream, and I'm saying to myself, I remember standing on this rock, I realized that I'm connected to all life. All life. And so this picture, I try to describe the shift from life as a series of stepwise mechanisms, very linear, very narrow, very logical, to life is actually a flow. Life involves flow. Life involves connection. Life involves expression. So that was sort of a great insight, but then it wore off, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm back to ordinary reality. And but I just couldn't go back to the laboratory. It was like, this is meaningless. How could I go to the laboratory? And so I instead just stopped. I stopped going to the lab. I stopped actually moving and stopped speaking altogether. And this is called psychosis or catatonia. But in fact, after years of sort of looking at it and being a psychiatrist and trying to help other people look at it, a lot of what's described as psychosis is an attempt to integrate at a deep level. Why are you here? What's important? Who am I? Like the really big questions. And it's not, I don't believe, an illness, but it's an attempt to solve a problem. Alfred Adler said, what are seen as symptoms are attempts to solve a problem. And for some people, the problems are deeper than others, especially if there was some severe trauma, physical, sexual, economic, racial, during one's childhood. And I think we're getting it all wrong when we say these are illnesses, because if we say it's an illness, and it's like diabetes, which really is not a good parallel, because there is no chemical that has been found. I mean, you've probably heard that these severe problems are chemical imbalances. How many people have heard that? Yeah. And of those of you that have heard that, how many could tell me what that chemical imbalance is? I don't see any hands going up. How can we say there's a chemical imbalance and yet no one can define what the imbalance is? I would contend because there is no chemical imbalance. There are differences, but a chemical imbalance implies that there's a defined balance. What do you think? Does anybody ever define what the chemical balance is? What do you think? Never been defined. Imagine, we have an entire mental health system for the entire industrial world based on misinformation. Based on misinformation. To such a degree that just 3 years ago, the director of our National Institute of Mental Health, Dr. Thomas Insel, said that they, at the National Institute of Mental Health, would not use the DSM-5. Did anybody hear that that was actually declared? Do you know why? Do you know why they will not use the DSM-5? Because he declared, he said, we're not going to use the DSM-5 because we have not found the biological basis for any diagnostic group. Imagine that. We have an entire structure of description which is based on no evidence. They always talk about evidence-based practice. The entire practice is not evidence-based because they can't find the so-called chemical imbalance, which, by the way, has a great consequence. If you think it's a chemical imbalance, what do you think is the primary tool or the primary means of correcting this problem? What do you think? Yeah, medication, medication, medication. Does that work? What do you think? You're primarily basing your treatment on medication. Is that going to work? It's not working. Now, I'm not opposed to medication. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm board certified. I write scripts. I hand the script to someone. I say, here you are. Here's some medication. It's not going to solve your problem. It's going to give you a little bit of extra time, but only you and the people around you can solve your problems. So we really... You have the power. You have the power. The healer is within each person. It's not in the doctor. It's not in the nurse. It's not in the social worker. It's in the person. Yes, it's in the person. And that's very important because that means that all of our services should be designed to give maximum choice and maximum power to the person who is going through the difficult experience and not to everyone else to tell them what to do. We have to shift that power. And it has to be in the hands of the person who's suffering. We also have to give hope. Too many times, people are told that they have a severe diagnosis. We'll just take schizophrenia for an example. And when they're told they have schizophrenia, what do you think they're told is their prognosis, even today? What do you think? Maintenance, at best? Limited life circumstances? That's terrible. Why would you try? And then people say, my gosh, so-and-so has poor insight into their illness. I'd say it's good sense not to accept a prognosis of doom. That, I would say, is good sense. That's not lack of insight. That's refusal to accept a death sentence. Now, luckily, in my own situation, I had a psychiatrist therapist who I unbelievably somehow found who never believed that I wouldn't recover. And that made such a huge difference. I was hospitalized on 3 occasions. And the second occasion was for 6 months. It was in a Navy hospital, which is dreadful. I was there because I'd been in the public health service and the Navy provided psychiatric services. It was really, really difficult experience. Out of that came 2, or 1 at least, good outcome, I'd say, and that was I decided that if I got out of there, that I'd become a psychiatrist and change the mental health system. Some people could say that was a sign that I never really recovered. Imagine the fantasy that I had, the idea of delusion of grandeur, that I could change the mental health system. But that has propelled me and motivated me for 40 plus years. And what I learned was psychiatrists are limited in power, actually. It seems like when you're in a hospital that they're all powerful, but as soon as if you're a psychiatrist and you make a decision that somebody doesn't like, I was telling Sean O'Neill, I could get a call from the governor's office. Why are you discharging this person? We don't think they're ready to leave. So there are many people that surround you when you're a psychiatrist. So that's why I went on to found the National Empowerment Center and try to change the politics behind it. This sort of ugly-looking creature, I want to tell you a little bit of. This is a drawing that, again, my daughter, she could have done a much better job. But so I want to tell you, this is to point out the connection between severe psychiatric problems and trauma. So I think our system, we need to pay much more attention to trauma. Trauma. I think you say trauma, anyway. But you know the word. You know the concept. You know the idea. Instead of saying it's a chemical imbalance, say actually there's probably trauma that interfered with a person's development so they couldn't form the relationships and the love and work that was necessary to lead a healthy life. And that's very different. If that's the consequence, then it's about developing the relationships that you haven't been able to develop and to be able to explore, what were the roots at some point when you feel that you have enough sense of self to do that. And actually, therapy can be very helpful for people with the most severe problems, despite the so-called evidence to the contrary. More recent evidence shows that it can be helpful. And that's because we're all human beings just trying to make sense out of this world. And being able to sit down with somebody and go sort that out is very, very important. And so they should be supported. There should be more support for it than for people seeing doctor for for medication. Right now, I don't know in the U.S., probably true here. Most industrial countries, they pay so much more money to the psychiatrist giving medication visits than they do for a social worker, psychologist, or anybody talking to somebody. That's a crime. That should end. And any policy change should give much more support to therapy and peer support and psychosocial supports. Because you need to restore your sense of self. You need to restore your sense that, you exist and there's a reason for you being here. And otherwise, you're just going to kill yourself. And there were times that I didn't see any reason to go on because I didn't feel like I had a future, I had a life. So this angry-looking creature here, I'll tell you a little bit about this creature. So I had a dream. It was between two hospitalizations. And my psychiatrist, by the way, his view was that I improved with every psychotic experience. He saw improvement with each of I had about 4 of them, and he said each time I improved, which was very helpful for my wife-to-be to hear, because she was terrified during the last episode I had, which did not result in a hospitalization. But each time I would go deep, deep, deep inside and stop, anything until I knew what to do next. And as usually, I usually was thinking a lot. It was a different kind of thinking, sort of image thinking. And dreams were very important. So this was a dream that I had, and in the dream, picture a castle. So there's a castle, and in the dungeon of the castle, picture 2 young men that are corporals. So they're not at the very bottom, but they're next to the bottom in the hierarchy of the army. And they're looking through microscopes, and every once in a while they get up, and they go to their boss, who's a colonel, and they say, "We want to leave this dungeon. We want to get out." And at that moment, he pulls out this picture of this horrible-looking creature, and he said, "You can't leave because your brain looks like this. Your brain looks like a gargoyle." That was supposed to be a gargoyle, just looks like an angry dog, but I could redraw it, but anyway, this is what came out. And I didn't even think about the fact it was going to be angry. That's why my daughter is right. Your hand will draw something that you're feeling before you even know what you want to do. So art is very important in recovery. Art, all the arts, the drawing, the dancing, music, they tap into the part of you which is actually more than a part of you, it's probably all of you. Whereas your words are just, they can often lie. You think you know something, you really don't know who you are until you can tap into this deeper sort of emotional and artistic or whatever, non-linear side of yourself. And so this creature, the colonel holds it up, and it's a sort of yellowing piece of parchment, and said, "You can't leave because your brain is deformed, it's defective. You have a defective brain, you have a chemical imbalance, so you can't leave this dungeon." And they go back, and they study some more. And then a lieutenant comes in, has done independent research, and he finds that in fact they had a blind spot from looking through the microscope too long, but the blind spot had healed, and their brains are fine. So the 3 of them go again, and the colonel again pulls out this very old ancient parchment. No, you can't leave. You have a chemical imbalance. You can't get out of the dungeon." And they say, "Nope, you're wrong. The evidence is that they've recovered fully and they can leave." And they leave. And that really sort of predicted for me my final step of recovery, which was an acceptance that my brain was whole and that I was whole. And that we're all basically healthy people that have had unhealthy things happen in our lives. There are no defective brains. There are no defective people. There are differences, but we are whole, healthy people. And that has to get across to all these industrial countries. I think in developing countries still have a concept that people can recover. And that's why people do recover better in developing countries. They say, well, a spirit was there and it was a bad spirit and they've left. I think that's a much healthier way to approach it, quite honestly. We are underdeveloped in the so-called developed countries. We are socially and culturally underdeveloped. We need to see what people in developing countries are doing and celebrate it and understand it and embrace more of it and not do the opposite, which is, oh, they have to all be diagnosed and take medication, because that is not working. We need to understand the cultural approach. So, let me just tell you a little bit more about this gargoyle. So several years later, I meditate. I find that very, very helpful. Meditate when I sit. I sometimes meditate when I stand. I meditate sometimes during this talk. I'll be meditating, even just a second of meditation. Do people here meditate? Anybody? Or mindfulness? Mindfulness is sort of the acceptable Western description of meditation, right? John Kabat-Zinn up in Massachusetts actually said, oh, well, let's just give it a different name, and people in the West will do it, right? So I was meditating. I prefer that. I was meditating, and I was thinking about this gargoyle on this sort of yellow parchment. Now, do you notice behind the gargoyle sort of some outline? What do you see behind the gargoyle? A map of the world. I'm very embarrassed, though. I don't think Australia is on that map. I have to redraw that map because I'm sure you're there somewhere. So I'm thinking, my God, that map, that seems familiar. I know in my history I saw that map. And it occurred to me, I was in 5th grade. I was in the 5th grade in that Gilman school that was, my family's school and everything. And my 5th grade teacher used to take me and other students in that class down to the basement of that building and sexually abused us. And it was called the dungeon. It was called the dungeon. So never doubt that a dream, when you're dreaming, you're actively trying to make sense of your whole life. And that was such an insight to me. My feeling that I was defective came from being abused. And that abuse interfered with my relationships. It interfered with my sense of self. It interfered with my self-expression, with my emotions, and disconnected me emotionally from myself and other people. And I'd say that was what I was trying to work on, and ultimately I feel solved through psychosis. I had to go into another reality. I had to get out of day-to-day reality. And it's really like dreaming isn't enough at night. You have to continue to dream during the day. And if people can just be with you during those periods and be witnessed in a fearless way, you can then progress in your development. And you won't have recidivism. And there are a few examples of this. I won't go into great detail, but open dialogue in Finland is an example. I've gotten 200 hours of training in that, and I use that in my practice now with families, to be with somebody in a fearless way. And I'll talk now a bit about emotional CPR, because that's sort of a present, aside from my wife and my daughters, my most cherished everything. Because I believe that if we can change the relationships, change the nature of the relationships between each person in the community, not just the mental health system, we have to change the whole community. Now that sounds overly ambitious, but I think it can be done. I really do. I believe it can be done. And I think it is imperative that we do it, actually. The failure of community mental health has been the failure to change our model, the failure to change our approach to each other. You can't just change the location of service. You have to change how you think about people. You have to change how you relate to each other. And every relationship plays a role in whether people recover or don't recover. Every relationship. Not just the family, but also the school, also the workplace, every locale. But we can change those. And the way to do it, we feel, is to ask people, like myself, how did you recover? What was most important in your recovery? And it was always relationships. We've done hundreds of studies now of finding principles of recovery, and they all come back to being treated with respect and dignity and given more control over your life so that you can develop a sense of self and you feel like there's a reason to live, that you have a voice and impact on other people. We have 10 components, 15 components. They all add up to generally the same thing. But what we don't have is how do we implement? How do we implement these principles of recovery? And they have to be implemented by everyone. You can't just have peers march into a community mental health center with an old culture and feel devastated by noticing that nobody really wants to respect what they're doing. They should have the most important role in a mental health center should be the peers. Because peers give hope. Peers know, we know in our heart what's been helpful. It's not in a book. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't go to school, just that should get much less emphasis than the school of life. That's what really is the most important teacher, is a teacher of life. It's really nice to be in Australia because I feel I can say the things that I want to say back home, and I've said them at home. I'm already under, close scrutiny. Our Congress thinks, our very, very Republican Congress thinks that our small center, the National Empowerment Center, is interfering with medical progress and should not continue to be funded even. They even write us up in the Wall Street Journal. The National Empowerment Center is interfering with medical progress. Yeah, because we think people come first and pills come second. We need people first, pills second. So how do we do this? Well, if my slides will advance, where is audiovisual? They always say they're going to be around and they're never here. This is my family today. This on the far right, well, that's me, and that's my sister-in-law next to me. My older daughter, who's she lives in Berlin. She works on gender rights of women. And the next young woman is my younger daughter, Lauren. She lives in LA. She's an artist. And my wife, bless her soul, I said to her, we've been together for 40 years. I said, what were you thinking? Marrying somebody with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, what were you thinking? And she said, I just never saw you as sick. She never saw me as sick. She always saw the me inside. She doesn't always agree that I don't have problems, but many of them she traced to my gender more than that comes with the territory. Then my sister-in-law and my brother on the far left. I can't go into this. You can read on our website that this is an empowerment model or empowerment paradigm of recovery as opposed to the medical model, which basically says that everyone can get sick or be labeled or excluded from society, but everybody can recover. And recovery is really more recovery from the exclusion from society rather than recovery, of mental health. Healing is really about mental health. But I can't go into all that. And I can't even make this thing advance. This also is sort of like a quick overview. We have a course, training, whatever, to help people to gain a sense of empowerment. And although it's for peers, it could be for everybody. Everybody probably wants to feel they have a little more power in their life. And we call it 12 P's of empowerment. Starts with personal peer support, which just could be friends. It doesn't mean it has to be everybody's lived experience. I mean, after all, we all have lived experience, hopefully, if we've been living. So we've now generalized our title of ourselves that it's broad enough to include everyone. And since we feel that everyone needs to recover their humanity, then that's fine. Everybody can learn what we've been learning. It's just that it hit us first. It's probably going to hit everybody else a little while later. The DSM has already classified most everybody in our country as mentally ill. So we must be mentally ill to be in favor of that person who thinks that everybody should stay out of our country. I won't get into politics, but personally, I wish Bernie Sanders had made it, but he didn't. Anyway, the biggest thing here we find most important is to convert your anger to passion. I think people are angry. Not only people are labeled mentally ill, but everybody's a bit angry because we're frustrated. We can't be ourselves. We can't express ourselves. And the more that we can express ourselves, the more we can identify our passion instead of the anger that we feel about it. And then ultimately, then you can have purpose and meaning. I think also the relevance of this is that we rush to planning too soon. People are not ready to set up a treatment plan or know what the treatment plan if they don't know what their meaning is in life or if they even want to be alive. And so first you have to restore a sense of self and a sense that there's a reason for you to be here on this earth. Then you might think, well, I actually might make a plan. But if you rush into somebody whose main question is, why am I here and who am I? And you say, let's set up a treatment plan, they're thinking, what the F? I wonder why I should be here. So first address, why am I here? And that comes more from rebuilding a sense of self and overcoming the effects of trauma. Okay, so some of you already have heard some of this, although you didn't see it on the slides, although I handed them out. And yesterday we had 2 workshops, 3-hour workshops on emotional CPR. And but I think some of these ideas can be repeated. Lord knows I've been doing this for 7 years, and I repeat them to myself, and every time I repeat them, they seem different. So sometimes repetition is what you need in order to actually feel and sense, what does this mean? And I joke about the fact that I'm really grateful to Mental Health First Aid because it made those leaders in our country of people who lived experience so angry that we developed emotional CPR. Because we really feel, I don't want to be overly critical of Mental Health First Aid, but it is so old school, so pre-recovery. It's really, I was in Singapore a couple of years ago and they said, what is this emotional CPR? Is it mental health or is it something broader? And I said, well, actually, it's public health. And if we're going to move the system more to public health, this, I think, is a very good example of how to do it. And the woman who was talking to me, she was head of their psychosocial department. And she said, oh, good, mental health first aid seems to increase stigma. And so we've rejected it in Singapore. And it unfortunately unwittingly does because it teaches the general public how to diagnose. We should get beyond diagnosis. We want narrative descriptions of people's lives. We want people to broaden, not narrow down their life. That's why we say I'm not a schizophrenic. Actually, I'm a human being who is trying to understand why I'm here and to overcome the effects of trauma so I can integrate and lead a full life. Not, I'm just this number. So anyway, it has anything I don't cover, you can look it up on our website, emotional-cpr.org. Our goal is to uncover potential of people to assist others through an emotional crisis and improve relationships for people around the world. That's all. That's all. That's our goal. Very, very minor goal. We did originally develop it to help people, any person in or outside of the mental health system, help any other person through an emotional crisis. But then we find it actually helps anybody to communicate with anybody because it's amazing anybody knows what anybody's trying to say since we spend so much time looking at our goddamn cell phones, we don't even know what a human face looks like anymore. But this is an attempt to rehumanize our societies. So what comes from the heart goes to the heart. This is all about heart. 5 minutes. Oh, okay. So I have to end before? Oh, yeah. Okay. 5 minutes. Okay, it's a 5-minute tour of emotional CPR. C is for connecting, P is for empowering, and R is for revitalizing. It's just, don't think of it as being a linear thing, though. This is just as a reminder. This tells you actually just about everything you need to know about what I'm trying to say, and that is we see life over on the right as a hopeful, healthy goal that people are connected heart to heart as well as head to head, as well as cognitively. But trauma and loss isolates people into their own world of monologue, and you don't have to be diagnosed to be in that world. I think we have a whole world full of people walking around in their own world, not connected, especially at the heart level, to themselves or other people. So emotional CPR hopefully brings people back, heart-to-heart connection. People's hearts actually increase in size, emotional hearts, when you are connected. And there's a we CPR, so we apply it to a group, not just individuals. And the same principles apply in a group. Equality is very important. Leave your hat at the door. One of them's a New York Yankee hat. Even though I'm from Boston, I don't know why it's a Yankee hat, except it's good to get rid of it. Anyway. Neutral place. You non-judgmental, respecting differences, and suspend your beliefs. And this, we've sort of boiled it down to 6 intentions, emotional CPR. And the idea is that I'll be with people, and when I'm with people, I will use my eyes and my ears and my heart to feel your presence in my being. And that rarely occurs in day-to-day life, let alone mental health. Secondly, I will share my emotional response in being with you, and I will stay with you. If you're with somebody and they're saying something that's very sad, and a little tear starts to emerge in your cheek, it's important to let it be there and let them see it. Don't dab it away right away or say, you know, I'm not the type of person that cries. It's okay to cry, especially men. I think if men cried more, we'd have less war, less substance abuse. Men who hear, spread the word. It's okay to cry. Third, try to be with you and not judge you or fix you. Be, don't do. Be, don't do. And our whole system is, got a plan. And usually it turns out people are trying to fix other people because of their own distress, not the other person's distress. Fourth, I'm not sure what's best for you. I'm not an expert in your life. You're the expert. But together we're going to make that discovery. And the fifth one is a similar one. Together we'll access the power to heal that is within you. And the last one is we're creating life together in the present moment. New life. We need new life. This is a monk depiction of trauma. And this just shows you that emotional CPR, especially good for healing trauma, because the effects of trauma are alienation, voicelessness, and numbness. And our outcomes for emotional CPR is emotional connection, emotional power, and emotional revitalization, which is bringing your emotions back. And here's just the last series of drawings. If you bear with me, the poor artist. This is an attempt artistically to show what happens, we feel, ideally in emotional CPR. Here's a person with trauma. They have a sort of a guard over their heart. So you can't feel your feelings due to trauma. I cannot feel my feelings when I'm suffering the impact of trauma. The healer is within, but at times I can't reach the key alone. I need help. At times I need help. I can't meditate. I can meditate forever, but if I'm blocked emotionally, I can't find it. A helpful assisting person comes up and their heart is open. I will be with you. I will not fix or judge you. I'll just be with you. And there's actually a smile starting to occur in the person who's in distress. And that person starts to say, I feel part of my key is stirring. And they're holding sort of a half of a heart in their hands. And the other person, I have part of the key from my feelings too. And so they put the key together. It's a sort of a heart-shaped key, which is really feelings and emotions. Thank you, I can feel my heart. And the other person actually who assisted, I thank you, you helped my heart to grow. This is the peer principle, really, that when you help somebody, your heart grows as well as theirs. And we're creating new life together in the present moment. And time is up. Thank you all very much.
The most critical advance on the practitioner's part is the development of a belief that everyone is able to recovery, that recovery is indeed a possibility for every individual that we serve. These ideas are supported by a couple of classic outcome studies. The classic outcome study on recovery from mental illness and the influence that mental health rehabilitation services have on recovery is the 32-year longitudinal study of patients from the Vermont State Psychiatric Hospital reported by Harding and his colleagues in 1987. George Brooks, superintendent of the hospital, selected a cohort of 269 chronic patients who had sifted out of all the hospital admissions to the back wards. At the time of their selection for the study in the mid-1950s, these patients had been ill for an average of 16 years, totally disabled for 10 years, and hospitalized continuously for 6 years. They participated in a pioneering rehabilitation program and were released in a planned deinstitutional process with community supports in place. These clients were followed up 32 years later. 34% of the living people with a diagnosis of schizophrenia experienced full recovery in both psychiatric status and social functioning, and an additional 34% of the people were significantly improved in both areas. The definition of recovery used in these studies is defined as no current signs and symptoms of any mental illness, no current medications, working, relating well to family and friends, integrated into the community, and behaving in such a way as to not being able to detect having ever been hospitalized for any kind of psychiatric problem. In an overview of the World Health Organization studies on schizophrenia, it was found that independent from the setting and contrary to the beliefs held in the psychiatric field for decades, there is a remarkable percentage of patients who recover from the illness. In 27 major long-term follow-up studies published between 1960 and 1991, the percentage of patients assessed as clinically recovered ranged from a low of 6% to a high of 66%, with an average of 28% and a median of 26%. The percentage of patients who showed a social recovery ranges from a low of 17% to a high of 75%, with an average of 52% and a median value of 54%. Some authors have proposed a challenging view of the very concept of chronicity, stating that a variety of environmental and psychosocial factors can affect patient outcome and induce a misperception of chronicity. Florida has undertaken a process to implement recovery principles into treatment called the Recovery-Oriented Systems of Care Initiative. In 2016, the planning process had a summit meeting, and at that meeting they began to flesh out their vision for the state's recovery-oriented systems of care. They identified numerous priorities in the process, but the top 5 priorities are listed below. Number 1, collaborative service relationships. Participants were eager to create a system in which providers and the individuals they served worked as true partners in recovery. A collaborative relationship shifts the typical expert-patient hierarchy in which the provider might say, "This is what you must do," to a model that helps individuals assume responsibility for their own wellness and recovery. In such a person-centered model, the provider might ask, "How can I help you?" With more collaboration, assessments and service planning would not be merely medical in nature, but would become grounded in the broader life goals that individuals identify for themselves. Priority number 2, cross-system partnerships. Participants recognize the importance of working across sectors to achieve common goals. They saw much value in reaching out to criminal justice, child welfare, housing, public health, education, and transportation to identify shared goals and strategically leverage resources. Priority number 3, community integration. Participants want Florida's behavioral health system to help individuals build meaningful lives in their communities. They envision a system that supports people in identifying dreams, goals, and preferences for their lives, and then connects them to resources and helps them develop their own interests, skills, and relationships. Participants saw the need to assertively help people stay connected to natural community-based resources and to support the development of a strong recovery community and advocacy organizations. Priority number 4, community health and wellness. Summit participants valued placing a stronger focus on prevention, early intervention, and community wellness. They envisioned increasing attention to building recovery capital through targeted community education, strategic partnerships, effective prevention programs, and stronger connections between the behavioral health system and local communities. And finally, priority number 5, peer-based recovery supports. Participants saw the inclusion of people with lived experience as fundamental to building a recovery-oriented system of care. They identified far-reaching benefits from increasing access to peer support services. They valued peers for their ability to relate to individuals using services, increase the involvement of family members and the community in recovery, reduce stigma, and promote hope and understanding that recovery and change are possible. Let's look at how a recovery-oriented system of care affects service planning. All case management services and supports to be provided should be based on an individualized, multidisciplinary service plan developed in partnership with the person receiving these services and others that he or she identifies as supportive of this process. While based on a model of collaboration, significant effort is taken to ensure that the individual's right to self-determination is respected and that all individuals are afforded maximum opportunity to exercise choice in the full range of treatment and life decisions. The individualized service plan will satisfy the criteria for treatment, service, or care plans that are required by other bodies such as licensing agencies and CMS, and will include a comprehensive and culturally sensitive assessment of the person's hopes, assets, strengths, interests, and goals, and will reflect a holistic understanding of his or her behavioral health conditions, general medical concerns, and desires to build or maintain a meaningful life in the community. There are several practice guidelines that are defined in various domains. The first of those domains is that the core principles of person-centered planning are followed in the process of building the individualized service plan. For example, consistent with the nothing about us without us rule, staff actively partner with the individual in all planning meetings and or case conferences regarding his or her services and supports. The individual has reasonable control as to the location and time of the planning meetings, as well as to who is involved. The language of the plan is understandable to all participants, including the focused person and his or her non-professional natural supports. Where technical or professional terminology is necessary, this terminology is explained to all participants in the planning process. When individuals are engaged in rehabilitation services such as housing, social services, educational, or employment, the rehabilitation practitioners are involved in all of the planning meetings at the discretion of the individual and should be given copies of the resulting plan. Within the planning process, a diverse, flexible range of options should be available so that people can access and choose those supports that will best assist them in their recovery. Goals are based on the individual's unique interests, preferences, and strengths, and objectives and interventions are clearly related to the attainment of these stated goals. Planning focuses on the identification of concrete next steps, along with specific timelines that will allow the person to draw upon existing strengths to move forward in his or her vision for the future. Assessments begin with the assumption that individuals are the experts on their own recovery and that they have learned much in the process of living with and working through their struggles. Information on rights and responsibilities regarding services should be provided at all planning meetings. The individual has the ability to select or change his or her service providers within relevant guidelines and should be made aware of the procedures for doing so. In the spirit of true partnership and transparency, all parties must have access to the same information if people are to embrace and effectively carry out the responsibilities associated with the service plan. And finally, the team should reconvene as necessary to address life goals, accomplishments on the plans, and barriers to completing tasks defined on the plan. Number 2, a wide range of interventions and contributors to the planning and care process are recognized and respected. For example, practitioners should acknowledge the value of the person's existing relationships and connections. The plan should identify a wide range of both professional supports and alternative strategies to support the person's recovery, particularly those which have been helpful to others with similar struggles. Individuals are not required to attain or maintain clinical stability or abstinence before they are supported by the planning team in pursuing such goals as employment. And goals and objectives are driven by the person's current values and needs, and not solely by commonly desired clinical or professional outcomes. Number 3, community inclusion is valued as a commonly identified and desired outcome. For example, the focus of planning and care is on how to create pathways to meaningful and successful community life, and not just on how to maintain clinical stability or abstinence. Service plans respect the fact that services and practitioners should not remain central to a person's life over time, and exit or completion criteria from formal services are clearly defined. Recovery plans consider not only how the individual can access and receive needed supports from the behavioral health system and the community, but how the individual can, in turn, give back to others. And finally, practitioners are mindful of the limited resources available for specialized services and focus on community solutions and resources first by asking themselves, am I about to recommend or replicate a service or support that is already available in the broader community. Number 4, the planning process honors the dignity of risk and the right to fail, as evidenced by the following. Prior to appealing to coercive measures, practitioners relentlessly try different ways of engaging and persuading individuals in ways which respect their ability to make choices on their own behalf. Unless determined to require conservatorship by a judge, individuals are presumed competent and entitled to make their own decisions. Practitioners are encouraged to offer their expertise and suggestions respectfully within the context of a collaborative relationship, outlining for the person the range of options and their possible consequences. And in keeping with this stance, practitioners encourage individuals to write their own crisis and contingency plans. Florida Self-Directed Care is a service delivery paradigm that places individuals with mental illnesses squarely at the center of decision-making that affects them. The SDC was conceived in Nassau County, Florida in 1998 by a group of dedicated grassroots advocates and mental health administrators. 3 years of subsequent planning led to legislation that created a new and innovative program for adults diagnosed with a serious mental illness. The original program serves a 5-county area in northeast Florida. It enrolled its first participants in 2002. The success of the Northeast Florida program led to the creation of a second program serving 5 counties in southwest Florida. The Florida SDC program hinges on the belief that individuals are capable of choosing services and making purchases that will help them begin or remain on the road to recovery and to develop or regain a life of meaningful, productive activity. The goal of Florida SDC is to respect and promote self-determination, recovery, and full community inclusion for people who have been diagnosed with a mental illness and who depend on government-subsidized mental wellness services. Participants in Florida SDC select the providers, services, and activities that they deem necessary for recovery and the achievement of the highest level of desired personal wellness and quality of life. Through a careful self-assessment of previous purchases, experience, and outcomes, individuals are given the flexibility to make adjustments to fit their needs in order to engage in meaningful activities and to attain a higher quality of life. The Florida SDC program gives each participant control of the public financial resources to access mental health services that are normally directly contracted to a public community mental health provider. Florida SDC participants can use their budgets to purchase mental wellness services from any member of the Florida SDC network that provides services within the district in which the participant resides. The primary purpose of these funds is to purchase psychiatric and mental wellness care. However, a unique option within the program is the opportunity for participants to access alternative and non-traditional services that result in the same outcomes as traditional mental health services. For example, instead of attending psychotherapy group for depression at a local mental health professional's office, a Florida SDC participant may elect to participate in a community-based support group. The personal outcomes are similar, but the type of actual service is very different, both in cost and experience. Florida SDC also offers participants match funding opportunities to purchase tangible items such as clothes and shoes that will enhance the person's integration into the community so that he or she can return to work or other meaningful activity. Participants in the Florida SDC program choose from a variety of community-based providers that may or may not already be a part of the current public community mental health system. Residential and crisis stabilization services are delivered by existing community mental health providers through the traditional delivery system. Participants are responsible for determining exactly which community-based services they want and by whom these services will be provided. The Florida SDC model utilizes self-determination at each point in the service delivery process. People participating in mental health services have guided the development of this program through the development of forms for reporting and planning, creation of operational policies and procedures, and expansion of the provider network. As a result, there is confidence that the model reflects the values and priorities of participants and enhances the ability of each to live and interact as independently as possible, enjoy and improve quality of life, and demonstrate successful outcomes. The ultimate goal of the Florida SDC program is to give participants the opportunity to design and travel a personalized road to recovery from the adverse effects of mental illness so that they can return to a productive lifestyle. A productive lifestyle is legislatively defined for the purpose of this program as achieving a state of mental wellness so that a person can return to work and begin to generate earned income through employment. The approach to providing services is participant-driven and seeks to maximize each participant's ability to control the most important decisions about how he or she will manage his or her own personal recovery. The Florida SDC program encourages individuals to learn to live as fully, independently, and productively as possible, and to take responsibility for their choices and the consequences of those choices. Florida SDC seeks to decrease and in some cases eliminate patterns of participant dependency on formal systems of care and to promote participant self-control and self-efficacy and the use of natural and community supports. The goal of Florida SDC is to promote each participant's ability to set and achieve personal mental wellness and productivity goals, thereby enhancing each participant's quality of life. Participants will have the opportunity to increase their strengths within many components of their lives. The program abides by the philosophy that natural support should be identified and utilized by the individual as a first choice. Natural supports create an opportunity for individuals to feel greater autonomy and to integrate into the community. Community supports are identified and utilized in a way that truly involves individuals in the community at large and helps them to feel like they belong to the environment in which they live. Helping individuals have meaningful lives is a large part of recovery in mental health. The Florida SDC program staff work with the individuals in a cooperative relationship and act as coaches rather than experts. The Florida SDC program is dedicated to listening to individuals' specified needs and preferences rather than imposing values upon participants. The Florida SDC program is a model in which public funding follows the participant rather than the provider. Also, it is a program in which the individual, instead of the provider, makes decisions and selections to the greatest extent possible with respect to service provision. Accordingly, the following components are included in the program to maximize the principle of participant self-determination. First, recovery. In its simplest form, recovery can be defined as improving, mending, healing, and renewal. Recovery is about developing individual strengths and assets and giving individuals the room, support, and confidence to do so in the process. Recovery is about overcoming the adverse effects of mental illness that may have hampered the ability to fulfill personal goals. Second is choice. Choice is the ability and opportunity to select between alternatives, to have a say in the choice made, and to have options. Choice does not mean that a person can have anything he or she wants, but gives a person at least two options to choose from, which gives the person a sense of control, so that he or she may become more invested in attaining personally defined goals. Third is responsibility. Responsibility is taking accountability for one's choices and behaviors. In order to have responsibility, people must be treated as if they can be responsible. Responsibility involves accepting that one makes good and sometimes not so good selections. Taking responsibility for mistakes does not make a person a failure, but a true learner. Likewise, taking responsibilities for triumphs and other accomplishments serves as positive support, especially when shared with others. Learning from anything often requires non-judgmental and honest feedback from others, combined with thinking of options for the next time. Fourth is accountability. Accountability involves an expectation to give an account of progress in the program or lack of progress, of how choices are turning out toward the accomplishment of goals, and to make adjustments when goals are not being met. Accountable adults accept that they are human, but do not make excuses when they know that they've done something wrong. Accountable adults understand the difference between having limits due to a chronic mental illness symptom and blaming things they can control and improve upon due to their mental illness. Recovery is about looking at the holistic picture, and especially on focusing on strength that individuals have as opposed to limits they cannot control. Number 5 is control. Control for our purposes is about helping individuals identify the things that they control. For example, personal goals, hopes, and dreams, and the things they have no control over, how other people act or think. Control in recovery is about developing and accomplishing goals while knowing human beings cannot control everything. Number 6 is self-determination. Self-determination stems from the ability to believe in personal control, accountability, selections, and responsibility. Self-determination and free will come from the feelings and practices that success is possible regardless of the odds. The more chances human beings are given to succeed through a focus on personal strengths and positive feedback about personal accomplishments, no matter how small to someone else, the more likely that self-determination will develop as a foundation. And finally, self-direction. Self-direction is a concept in the recovery process which treats individuals as capable of making and determining their purposes and goals. Self-direction is encouraged and supported by people who work with individuals. Individuals are engaged in discussions regarding their capabilities and strengths, therefore helping the individual see hope and possibilities. Individuals can gain a sense of independence by determining their life's direction. We want to end the presentation today by introducing you to another very active voice in the recovery movement. Her name is Patricia Deegan. She is a disability rights advocate, a psychologist, and a mental health researcher. She is known as an active advocate of the mental health recovery movement and a co-founder of the National Empowerment Center. I found an article from her called Recovery as a Journey of the Heart that I believe speaks passionately regarding the recovery movement. That article is attached to the lesson media section on your lesson page.